All right, so we just went and saw the Wind Rises, the new Miyazaki film. We saw it here in Kansas City at the Alamo Drafthouse opening night, and we actually saw a Japanese language version with English subtitles, so it's a little something different. According to them, they're going to run that for the next week, so if you're here in town and want to do that as opposed to the English version, you could check that out. The format of this show, basically we're going to quickly say whether we like the movie or not and kind of talk about who we think it's for, who we think would like it, who we think probably wouldn't go for it, so you can kind of get a quick feel for whether you'd want to see this movie or not. And then if you want to continue watching, we'll kind of talk through some more points about the movie and what we liked and didn't. Maybe get into a little bit of spoiler territory, but not too bad. But just to give you kind of an overview before we really kind of dive into the rest of the conversation. So I liked this movie quite a bit. It was, for Miyazaki movies, sometimes for me they get a little bit bogged down or a little bit slow. This went by at a fairly good clip, even though it is a little bit over 2 hours long. That might be partially because I saw Son of God last night, which was really slow and really boring and hard to watch. But I really enjoyed this movie. It's not for kids. It's definitely an adult movie. And I wouldn't say that that's because of any of the content necessarily in it. It's not terrifically violent or sad or anything like that. Or, you know, frightening even necessarily compared to like a PG movie. But I don't know that younger kids would really have the attention span for it. So that's kind of my headline version of it.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I really liked it. I'd definitely give it a go. I think that it really had a lot of just good stuff to kind of keep your attention, like Dale was saying, and just really gives you something to kind of hold on to, and you find yourself captivated by more than just Miyazaki's ability to tell a story, but there's so much color and sound and so many things for it. Yeah, definitely not a children's film. You know, like children may come to, you know, like enjoy it, but it's not violent. Over time, I think that it'll be appreciated by people who get to see his canon of films and then find this one as one that's a little bit different. And so I think that people who really enjoy the work of any Japanese artist or Studio Ghibli fans, definitely this is a must-see. It totally gives you something that I don't think you're not expecting, because I know I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was different than I expected too.
Yeah, I think this is actually one of his best movies. I really enjoyed it. I think Dale was right. If you have children, this isn't for them. It's an adult drama, and if you really want something action or high octane or something like that, well, this isn't the movie for you. It does move along. It is a drama. It moves along at a reasonable pace, and really, it's very good. So.
All right, so that was a quick wrap up. We'll kind of dive into a little bit more now. You brought up the pacing, and that is the thing that I think really either wins me over or loses me in a Studio Ghibli film. They tend to be fairly long. You know, their American movies tend to be, 80, 90 minutes for animated stuff, and their movies tend to be in the 2 hour range. So when things bog down or slow down, or if they go into some tangent with some character you don't really care about, it becomes hard to watch. This movie consistently felt to me, the visuals were so stunning that it really, there was never a time where I was just bored. There was always something to look at. There was always something to see. But it had this very consistent, methodical, sort of like you were just sipping tea and reading a book, sort of a pace to it.
Yeah.
It was very casual, very slow, but not in a bad way. Not slow in a bad way, just in a very, we're moving ahead, things are continuing to go forward, and,
Yeah. Well, this is it's a, not to give it away, but it's a historical piece. You know, it's actually very grounded and very human, and it gives, and I think that's what gives it the good pace, is that we're watching the lives of these people, and it's not that in any other of his films or any of the Studio Ghibli films that you're uninterested in the people or the characters. It's just that in this moment you're like, this is very, I know this, you know, like I'm really aware of what's going on. However, you know, being in America and growing up with the history we have of how things occurred, you know, we don't know every side to every story, and we get a side to a story that I don't think I would have ever really known had I not been, you know, presented it in such a creative way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the story of, I mean, the main character of the movie, and I think the use of as few characters as they have is really nice. Like you're really just following the main guy through the whole thing, Hiro, and he's the designer of the Zero Fighter, and you sort of go through his journey from kind of late childhood all the way through to after World War II ends, and you know, I know the name, the Zero Fighters. I know I believe those were the kamikaze.
Yeah, that's what they were
planes.
For that, yes.
And so, you know, I knew them in that context. But it's interesting to see this movie, and it's told in a way that you get this sort of sense of Japan and the sort of detached, the engineers being detached from what's happening politically, what's happening in the rest of the world, and also the war is kind of, it's a distant thought in this movie. There's, you know, it's there, and people are aware of it, and they know it's going on, but it's not. This isn't like, you know, soldiers and battles and that kind of a story. It's
and you also get a good sense of how the Japanese were kind of feeling at that time. And I mean, if you catch it when they were in Germany and they were complaining about, oh, we're 20 years behind, and then we'll catch up, and all that,
and we'll be 5 years behind.
We'll then be 5 years behind, and you get a bit more of a sense of how Imperial Japan was in that time of history. Obviously, the whole thing was dramatized a little bit.
Sure.
And I know, going back to pacing a little bit, like you have Jiro's sister, who had a reasonably small part in there.
Yep.
And the one thing he did really well in this movie, I think, and this is just an example, is she was just on screen long enough to get a point across, and then it was over. And there was just enough there so that the next time she came on screen, there was enough there to get a small laugh. But he didn't. Sometimes he would let things linger in prior movies just a bit too long.
Yeah, every character that had any amount of screen time, even if it was only a couple of minutes, had a really distinct personality. They had a voice. Some characters were, you know, not necessarily just flat out comic relief, but there were characters that were there to sort of add a little bit of levity to it. The manager character, sometimes the sister is funny, and there's some moments in there that are, I think there's definitely moments in there that are laugh out loud funny, and there's also moments that I think are sort of ironically funny, but intentionally ironically funny. Like they're, you know, they talk about the state of Japanese technology and how they're developing aircraft and they're pulling them into the field with oxen to test them out.
Yeah, they're always very aware of their place in the world. It feels like it's not as if they're like, oh, we're gonna be the most supreme aeronaut engineers in the world, you know, whatever. It's just like we understand where we're at. I think there was even a moment where he's like, why is Japan so poor? And their economy crashing, which is very interesting too, because, you know, even though it's a Japanese film, we look at things that have happened in America, you know, taking the 20s and again later on with the recession, and just looking at, like, you know, like they're still building. They're still moving forward, no matter what is happening, whatever disaster or thing is occurring. These people are still progressing forward, which, you know, it's kind of interesting how worldly that is, because it doesn't separate us, you know, even as a society or as a culture or as people at all. And so it's really awesome to see how connected they were to just being like a country, you know, and just progressing forward and moving past the other things, like you said, being past the fighting and the soldiers, and not really having that be like their influence, you know. Who are these planes, you know, who are they going to be fighting? Well, I guess this slew of allies that are going to be attacking us because we're on this team, you know. It's just, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's an interesting take on, you know, the quote at the beginning of the movie that is sort of, every once in a while it's sort of repeated, kind of in a chorus, is the wind rises and we must find a way to live, and that theme is used in different contexts in different ways throughout the whole thing. The wind, I felt, was like a sort of a symbol for freedom, or a symbol for, you know, finding your way, or your, you know, what life throws at you, kind of a kind of a symbol for that. The way the storytelling works, everything, and part of this is certainly, you know, a Japanese cultural thing, but it's also partly what I find to be really brilliant storytelling, which is everything is very matter of fact. Like when we meet, he rescues a woman who's who's injured on a train accident, and he sort of helps her out and takes her home and all of that, and he just sort of leaves. He just, like, well, here you are, you're safe, everything's fine, and he leaves. And they're like, well, what's your name? And he just leaves and takes off. And they do end up, you know, reconnecting with that character, but at that moment in the movie, you don't know, you know, for all you know, that's the last time you're going to see that person. And he as a character, and the movie as a whole, kind of had this feeling of what will be, but this is what's important. What's important is, you know, realizing my dream of creating this aircraft that I know that I can make, and I know we need to have.
Yeah.
I guess just going back to the wind a little bit, it's more like the wind is the agent of change, of what's going to happen in the future. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, and it's the catalyst.
It's the catalyst of what's going on, and it did feature quite a bit in this movie. Like whenever there'd be a change, like it'd go from one thing into a dream sequence, and you'd see the wind blowing across the fields, which in some respect that also played a big part in the storytelling. I guess the one thing that sticks out in my mind a little bit is Jiro was portrayed as a very good man. I mean, he always tried to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Without even thinking about, well, should I do this? It's just like, oh, there's these poor children, I'll give them some food or something like that. And in that regard, it's perhaps a little bit tragic, because here he is designing this fighter. I mean, he wants to have this plane go really fast, be really awesome.
Right.
Advanced technology.
To be clear, he's not designing a fighter.
Well, he's not designing a fighter. He's designing a plane. It just happens to be a fighter.
That happens to be what it turns into.
Yeah, get commissioned by the Navy or the military.
That's how it's used. And
yeah.
They get into that pretty quickly with the aeronautics. Is that, you know, that's who pays the bills, so that's who they end up, you know, producing the planes for. But they're not designing them for warfare. They're designing them for, you know, can we make this happen? How can we advance our technology? How can we get better about doing that kind of stuff? I also thought the other cultures and the other countries that play into the story, that dynamic was very interesting to see. The him dreaming from being a young child about the Italian engineer, and having these dream sequences where he's talking with the Italian engineer, and then later when the company sends him to Germany to look at their technology, and they're buying German intelligence on how to build better things or build all metal aircraft and that kind of stuff. Just really interesting, how a perspective on how an average Japanese person in the 1930s and 40s would have seen the Italians and would have seen the Germans, and how it's just, as Americans, we get, the stories that we all see are always, Germany, just basically turns into this evil place, and Japan just also kind of turns into this evil place that kind of, comes and attacks us and throws us into war and all of that. But, you have to remember, as an American, as someone born in America, and as someone that lives in a country that has gone to war in my lifetime, I'm aware that our country goes to war, but I also have a level of disconnection from it.
Yeah.
I don't have a personal vendetta against the people of Iraq or Afghanistan or, that sort of thing. So it's interesting to see that, that kind of a dynamic play out sort of from the opposite or the other, another country's perspective.
Really, the other thing too is just we're talking about like the culture and everything there. We mentioned it at first that this is the Japanese version. It's not dubbed over in English, and so you have to read English subtitles to understand what they're saying. But I don't think that necessarily makes the story. I don't know if this is what's so great about the film is that it's not just the dialogue or reading the subtitles and getting what it is that they're saying. It's following heroes just. Or Jiro, following his dreams, and it's painted so vividly. It's just right there that I didn't have any trouble watching the film and reading the subtitles and continuing to watch the film. It was not a problem I don't know if you guys had that at all. I know some people just find it so annoying to have to do that. I love it. I think actually it's so much fun for me.
I'm a fairly slow reader just in general, and this movie to me, there were long stretches where there was no dialogue, and when there was dialogue, it was very much, a statement of facts. The other person says, "I agree with that," and then we move into the next scene, the next section of it. And again, with that very matter-of-fact sort of tone that, everyone just sort of understands and agrees to things. And everybody's really kind of there for each other. That's something that they put in, they start showing very early on, like before the war even comes, that there's this earthquake and everybody just sort of stops what they're doing and drops all their belongings and rushes to help. And
yeah, and in a lot of ways, the animation itself told the whole story.
Yeah.
There was a lot of expression on everyone's faces when it needed. Like, you could see Jiro at one point, he's looking at a macro bone, and you could just see the wonder in his eyes, and he's thinking, okay, how does this work into a plane? You didn't have to read any of the text to follow along with what the story was.
Yeah. I think you would have lost, there is something that you would lose if you just sat there and watched it without subtitles.
If you just watched the movie and didn't read anything.
You got to read some of the text. It does help to make it,
contextualize it a little bit.
Sure.
Is he married now? Is he not married now? What, that some of that explanation and some of the certainly some of the humor I think would have been lost, because I think most of the humor is dialogue driven humor. It's either a flat out joke or or it's something sort of ironic.
Or a big reaction.
Yeah. Well, and there's even a line that's that is the punchline is another irony.
Yeah.
You know, the joke is that the guy has to get married and have a family so that he can work harder. And that's another irony.
Yep.
You know, but I'm going to go get married so that I can really focus on my work.
Yeah.
And stay there all the time.
Stay there all the time. Because that's what married men do. They just go throw themselves at their work.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too. Married men and their work.
I should do.
Then what am I doing? I'm the unmarried one, and I feel like I'm just not doing anything. So apparently that's right. I guess you got to get married to get into my work. No, I think that the love story was a very interesting choice as well. I mean, because I don't know. You know, I know it's based off of this man who was the creator of the airplane, the zero, flighter airplane and whatnot. I'm not sure exactly of his personal life.
How much of it was dramatized and how much of it was.
I think I've done some history. Well, quite a bit of history, and I think it's a reasonable representation of the story. I know it's dramatized a little bit, and I don't remember all the facts, but I think it's basically following along with what his real life was. Obviously, I think the dream sequences and other things like that are interpreted a little bit.
Sure,
but
well, and sort of the convergence of both his wife's situation and the culmination of the Zero finally being finished. That may be true, but it seemed very convenient to the story.
Yeah, the timing of it just seemed to be convenient for the story.
Yeah. But I think it did have it gave it this other aspect, like with the jokiness of it all, of being, like here we are in this Japan that is pre-World War II, that is trying to be successful, that is just trying to make its way as a country after a previous war and all these things that are going on, and he still has the time to find love, even though he's like, I mean, I don't know. If I was put in his position, I would just feel like the stresses, again, probably some sort of, dramatization of it all. Like, he just seemed so even keel, even when things seemed bad. He was just like, okay, I know I got this. Like, I can take this on. And when it came down to his wife and her illness and everything, it's just like, wow, man, all of this coming down to this one thing. And the 10 years, I think, was very interesting. Artists, what was it? The artists only created for 10 years. Made me, one, crack up, but two, realize that, is that saying true necessarily in general, or was that for that time period? Or it's an interesting statement to make,
Yeah, it's, and that also that rings true for the kind of a sentiment that you would expect from the Japanese. That there's sort of a framework to how you live your life, and this part of your life is dedicated to this, and this part of your life is dedicated to this. One of the other interesting things with the relationship part of it is that they gloss over this a little bit, but his wife is considerably younger than he is.
Yes.
And that is never really, and again, I mean, that's another sort of, that's how Japanese culture is. So it's not, it's not given the American eye of, whoa, that's a huge age difference between those two. I also thought it was really interesting that, like I said, it does really follow the lead character. It focuses on the protagonist. We don't go off on tangents or anything like that. And it doesn't try to tell the story of World War II. We don't see battles. We don't hear, propaganda from Hirohito on anything. Hitler's name is mentioned once, and it's just sort of a curiosity. It's just sort of, oh, is that Mr. Hitler's government you're talking about that is going to do this? And, again, it's just kind of statement of fact. It's like, yeah, Germany's going to go to war again, and someone should stop them, but it's just going to happen. And, and Japan's going to go to war again, and it's not going to go well for us either. But you know,
and what
that's
do you
just
do?
where we're stuck.
That's what we do.
Yeah. But overall, I think that the like again with the pacing and the score, I mean, it was just so beautiful to watch, and it was like watching a series of beautiful paintings, just like make this fluid. You know, with the watercolors and the other stuff that's just like coming out, popping out at you, the blues and the greens and all of the fun colors that are there. It stimulates your eyes to not be bored, to not stray away, because there's just so many great pictures to look at.
Absolutely.
So I really enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, one part I enjoyed. There were several scenes where things were moving kind of slow, and I noticed that they went back to a style of animation more reminiscent of when you actually were still drawing things, and you would take a couple frames of the same spot, then move to the next one, and it kind of slowed things down and gave you that sense of what anime was back when it was first essentially coming out.
Yeah,
which in a lot of the modern, at least modern Japanese animation, you don't get that anymore. You get just the CGI.
Did it seem like there were some? It seemed to me like there were a couple of sequences that were computer generated. Did you feel like that too?
Yeah.
I think,
go ahead.
No, yeah, I think there were a few that, like the earthquake, definitely seemed computer generated.
The first one I really noticed was when they were sort of doing that flyby over the river, and it came down, and it was like a first person perspective as they were flowing down the river. That seemed very CG to me.
Yeah.
You know, just in the way that it flowed. It flowed more smoothly than their standard style of animation, which does, like, they don't give you a full 24 frames of animation. They tend to, you know, skip a few here and there, and that kind of leads to these sort of stop-start sort of.
Yeah, there were definitely times that you could tell that they were probably relying a little bit more on the CGI. Just, I think, like you said, to make it more fluid, to make it feel like it was moving almost like the wind, because sometimes it is hard with that start-stop animation, that, you know, that old, you know, original style of really giving it something new and fresh. And that's also, I think, to go along with the film itself, because you're looking at, you know, where they were and where they go, you know, and so maybe that's another thing that he was considering about, you know, how can I utilize a little bit of this and a little bit of that to make something complete, you know, to really, you know, fulfill the dream of doing this piece.
Yeah.
You know, I thought that was, it didn't bother me, I guess, but I'm, again, if, you know, if it's something that you're like, well, very critical about how you're putting together your film.
I think it flowed.
You know,
it flowed
really,
perfectly.
Yeah.
It was just something that I noticed, and I wondered if it was, you know, I wondered if it was jarring for either of you or not. But to me, it just seemed like I noticed it because I sort of I can tell that kind of stuff. You know, I play enough video games to sort of get a feel for when something's computer generated or not. That was just something that kind of stuck out to me. The other thing that I think would be interesting to see, and I tend to do this with a lot of foreign films, and Dave and I were talking about this a little bit on the way over here, that the English dubs for Studio Ghibli films tend to be really well done. They tend to do a really good job contextualizing them, and I can't remember which one it was, but one of the ones in the 90s, it might have been Princess Mononoke, was actually translated by Neil Gaiman, the author.
Yeah.
And there was an interview I saw with him where he was talking about not just doing a literal translation, which is what I think a lot of times the subtitles are a literal translation of what the people are saying. What Gaiman tried to do was contextualize it for the audience as well, so that the example that he gave was, there's a scene where a man says, "Your soup is bad." And Gaiman asked the Japanese producers, you know, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how big of an insult would that be to say to someone in Japanese culture? And they were like, a 12. And so in the in the English dub, instead of saying this soup is bad, the line is, "Are you selling soup or goat piss?" And so it's sort of contextualized and ratcheted up for, you know, the level of rudeness that it would need to be comparable in an American English version.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it puts a different spin on it because of the way that we kind of hear things and have value to things in the way that it is, and insults or pleasantries or anything like that. So it's totally different.
It'd be interesting for me to see the English dub and see like how different they go with it. You know, how just not in terms of the performance itself, which I don't really care about that part of it. I'm more interested in, you know, how they word things, how they say the same things.
Yeah.
So yeah, great movie. Really enjoyed it. Check it out if you're a fan of animation. I really enjoyed the historical aspect. You guys had anything else?
Yeah, I think that it was a good film to kind of come into with no expectations other than just, you know, knowing that it was Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli, and
just right.
That's just pretty much it, and just take me on an adventure and let's do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was fun.
Yep, go see the movie.
Cool. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.